Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, it was done with a smile and a handshake. What was done? A $28.2 billion state spending plan. What's in a smile and a handshake? Stay with us, and you'll find out.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, as always, it's budget time. State budget is under discussion. Now listen, as we tape this program, the final budget is not yet adopted, but we got a trio of the state's leading journalists to weigh in on the process and what's been going on in the state capitol. Joining me, as often is the case, is Amy Worden. She sits right here. She's with the Philadelphia Inquirer. Tony Romeo, KDKA Radio, and I must add, KYW, or you'll be in trouble, and I'll be in trouble. And over here to my right is John Micek, a reporter with the Allentown Morning Call, and a blogger, right?
A blogger.
We always get that. We get that Capital Ideas in. Now you don't blog in yet. You just have to do the hard work, right?
Right.
You're up here doing the hard work, and so
we occasionally blog.
You blog good. Will you let us know what you do?
By event.
By event. All right, John. Let's start with you. As we sit here and talk today, the budget has not yet been adopted, but what's this all about with the secrecy?
We were talking before we came on there that it's a bit like the Kremlin, in fact. There's a package of $525 or $545 million in cuts, depending on whom you listen to. And apparently everything is so highly tentative and so fragile that if it's even whispered on the wind, the whole thing will fall to pieces. It's extraordinary.
Tony, do you really believe that? I mean, look, you've been covering the Capitol for a long time. When the leaders get together and pretty much make an agreement in a leadership-driven General Assembly, isn't that what they do?
Sure, but it certainly would suggest that it's a return to the bad old days. We had this, the pay raise, the backlash, and then all this heralded reform. And I would point out that on Tuesday, the House was busily suspending the vaunted rules they set up to slow legislation down in order to speed the budget on through. What is interesting to me about this, though, is that the secrecy is odd to me in the sense that we've had contentious budgets before. Last year we went 17 days. We had a one-day furlough of non-critical state workers. And at that, from the time they had an agreement until they got a signed budget, that was like 7 or 8 or 9 days. And there didn't seem to be this paranoia, or at least this level of paranoia.
Now, Amy, look, you've covered a lot of these budgets. It's not like there's a crisis. I mean, in one sense, the state has a surplus. As Tony pointed out, they agreed not to furlough anybody. I don't understand. I mean, what's the issue here that y'all couldn't find out more about what's in the budget, up to the moment they're going to vote for it?
Well, you wonder just how tenuous this agment that came out in the wee hours is when all you're hearing no details except you're hearing that sort of the mantra that the devil is in the details. But you've got a huge amount of money. John mentioned the $500+ million in cuts, and where exactly is that coming? And that's the source of clearly an issues in the.
I've talked to appropriation staffers who said they essentially came out of the room with 3 or 4 of the big tentpole issues and nothing else decided. And so it's now a matter of going through and figuring out all these hundreds upon hundreds of line items and making them all work and plugging them all in and making the numbers work. But I mean, here's some case in point of how difficult it's been. The budget restores about $15 million to hospital programs in the Department of Public Welfare. One of them is a $5 million line item for regional burn centers, including one at Lehigh Valley Hospital, now in town where my newspaper is. I spent about 10 hours the other day simply trying to confirm the existence of this money, until somebody finally gave me a phone call at the end of the day and said, hey, if you put it in, it won't be wrong. I mean, that's how
that
paranoid.
Sounds like Watergate.
And that's how all that was missing was the meeting in the garage afterward. But I mean, that's how paranoid and cautious people are being about this.
But I think in the broadest sense, everybody came out early Monday morning saying it's a win-win. Each side gave a little and got a little. Republicans got their, no new taxes, no tax increases, held spending below the rate of inflation. And the Democrats, Rendell, got big energy program and record level increases in education funding. So you had a lot of a sort of a positive kind of attitude coming into this week.
Okay, into this week, and you think it's still, as the process goes, I guess we'll have to wait to find out. Go ahead.
What's curious to me, we're being led to believe, and my colleagues here can correct me if I'm wrong, that the cuts, the $500 million plus figure that you're hearing, that is what was cut from Rendell's proposed budget. And that's what it was happening here, actually, is that cuts that were made to the legislative priorities are being restored, is what my understanding of what's going on here. And so in that case, you would think that the big loser here would be in terms of cuts. So the paranoia about details and this, causing it to crash and burn with legislators seems to me to be a little odd.
Yeah.
But one of the
that's reflected in the governor's mood, though, as well. As he has not been out the way he was in past budgets, hailing this as a tremendous victory for Pennsylvanians because it has this program and spends that. He's been incredibly subdued and incredibly cautious about this.
But if you think in that equation, it would seem to be that the governor's the big loser when it comes to the cuts. Then the concern about legislators being unhappy with this and voting it down seems to be a little.
All right, there's also things that we're going to run to a break, but there's also things that they didn't do that they agreed to take up in the fall, or at least they agreed to disagree on. Well, what a time to end it. We'll go to break on that. We agree to disagree. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking about the proposed budget. The negotiations have been underway now for some time. As often is the case, Amy Worden from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Tony Romeo, KYW, KDKA Radio, and John Micek from the Allentown Morning Call join me. All right. What's kind of interesting to me is Governor Rendell has had every one of his budgets increased. It looks like this one with a 3.8% is not going to be increased over what he recommended, John Micek, but still there are differences that don't seem that they're postponing things. They're not dealing with anything. There's been a whole raft of the governor's priorities that have been put off until a very compressed September. There's about 12 legislative days in the calendar before they bail out for this fall's elections. We're talking about the governor's health care initiative. We're talking about large parts of his energy conservation plan. We're talking about possibly if that survives the week. Then we're talking about energy conservation and electricity rate cap extensions. All of them substantive issues that they're going to try to cram into an extremely compressed calendar. I don't know if that's just insane optimism or an acknowledgement that a lot of this stuff might not get done. Here's another point, and I want to get to Amy on another aspect of this in a moment. But Tony, let's think about this. They're going to leave town in about the end of first week in July. They're going to come back 12 days, mid-September to mid-October, take a break. The Senate is not coming back at all. In a sense, 12 more days out of 6 months. How has anybody thought of
full-time legislature? Anyone?
Full-time legislature. What is this about?
Well, it's anything that you can put off until tomorrow that you do. I don't know how the equation adds up there. You're not having the sign a die or lame duck session, and that every 2 years, right? Which is a reform move. But let's face it, every 2 years, this is the period after they've been safely reelected. Some people aren't coming back. They're less accountable, and that's when a lot of stuff that is dicey gets done, for good or for bad. And they're not having that this year. And it is very difficult, given the general inertia with this legislature when it comes to big-ticket items, especially how you're going to have all this, this long list of big-ticket items.
The governor has claimed that theoretically there are going to be working groups just slaving away through the summer,
Does anyone believe that?
They say that every budget season they want to get started earlier and earlier. I'm not sure anyone buys it.
What happened to the working groups that were supposed to be connected to the budget that called for 3 or 4 months ago?
Well, ask yourself why, in a year where you know it's a little tough, but you don't have any really big contentious budget issues.
Yeah, that was my point earlier.
Why does it come down to the middle of the night?
But you do have some complicated
right.
issues.
My point is,
turnpike lease, would you agree, is extraordinarily.
But that's not a budget issue.
Well, that's true, but it's the ancillary issues that are complicated. The budget
because
itself,
it's tied into infrastructure, which is
but why do you get a budget
mass
agreement in the
transit
middle of the night? Hours after the fiscal year is ended, because nothing gets done in this legislature unless you're smack up against some sort of hard deadline.
Which Dwight Evans, in fact, admitted himself in an interview
Committee in the House.
That they said they don't actually do anything until somebody is figuratively holding a gun to their head.
That's the interesting thing about the lack of the lame duck session, is that the deadline there usually ended up being the eve of Thanksgiving. They would be here off until 7, 8 o'clock or later on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, because everybody wanted to get out of town, and the leaders would come and say, "Here, eat this."
Yeah, but 12 days before we go on, I want to get to this point. I want to ask Amy about, but to get to the bigger point, 12 days in 6 months. Now, how do you possibly explain this to anyone? I mean, you all have to write these stories. I mean, how do you explain when people ask you, well, what's happening to this bill or that bill, or about this issue or that issue, or what are they doing?
Need to get reelected.
I understand that, but as you know, the reform movement is on life support. I'll probably hear from Tim Potts and the reformers about this. At least Tim is still plugging away, with the issue stuff.
I've adopted a philosophical shrug
that?
and just say, it's Pennsylvania.
It's Pennsylvania. Oh, okay. All right, Amy, I want to turn to you. Look, there are winners and losers in budgets all the time. It looks like education is a pretty big winner right now. They didn't get $300 million more. They didn't get everything that they wanted in Governor Rendell's costing out study. That was a plan. It was going to, is it $1.2 billion he asked for? Whatever, in increased spending over a period of time.
6 years. Yeah.
So how much they're getting $300 million more, and everybody looks like they're guaranteed. Every school district looks like something like 3%.
3%.
3%. But so education, you would say, is a winner?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Who are the losers?
Well, we don't know yet.
That's right. You don't know
but
yet.
I was going to say there's a lot
who's getting left out?
Well,
How do they put it that way?
Well,
who's complaining?
Well, the one cut that we actually have heard about does relate to education. That's the laptops.
Yeah.
That apparently Governor Rendell's Classrooms of the Future big laptop initiative is being cut pretty radically in half. At least that's what we know right now. So that was to the tune of $45 million, which is a significant cut.
So one of the reasons there are fewer complaints is that people aren't even aware of a lot of the specifics of the budget until they're probably presented for an up-down vote. Go ahead.
But where there's a lot of concern is in the social service sector. Those are the groups that respond to the most vulnerable around the state, and they exist by very slim margins to begin with.
Right.
So they're all thinking, and their funding is always tenuous, and it's often dependent upon federal funding as well. So they're very concerned.
All right, we're going to run to a break, but let me just make this observation you can think about. They're using the rainy day fund. That's a fund that's set aside for, quote, when the budget runs into deficit to help pay for things in this year's budget, even though there's a surplus. I understand that.
No, there's no tapping of the rainy day fund.
Oh, no, what they're doing is they're not making
the 25% allocation.
Well, okay, I understand. They're not making a payment, but in a sense it has the same effect of cutting down back the money that we're going to the rainy day fund. This year may be a walk in the park compared to next year if the recession continues.
That's right.
On that bad news, we'll take a note. We'll come back and continue with our discussion following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
All right, welcome back to the program. We're talking about the state budget and the complexities of getting a budget adopted, and they're kind of mind-boggling. Our trio of journalists here are helping us get this all straight. All right, the great hostage taking. We had 25,000 state employees held hostage. They lost a day's work, but not a day's pay. They were subsequently paid last year. No hostage taking. Well, maybe. Were there hostages this year?
You could say there were.
Right,
Not 25,000, maybe more in the neighborhood of 42.
42. Go ahead. Tell us about the 42.
State workers. Well, it's part of an interesting sort of side scenario, side show that's been going on amid the budget battles. We've seen a lot of sort of back and forth. You could say bill hostage taking going on, where you had, for instance, in the Senate, you had an autism related bill that would provide funding, would require insurance companies to cover autism related services. That was being promoted by the House Speaker. You had the Senate tying the very controversial Highmark Independence Blue Cross mergers, the Blues. So you have that one going on. Then the even more interesting was the governor's insistence on he wanted his health care insurance expansion program going. So he said, I'm not going to sign a bill that assures that the doctors will get their medical malpractice subsidy unless you give me the health insurance expansion, is what he told essentially the Senate Republicans. So ultimately that part fell apart. But the Senate went ahead and tied the medical malpractice insurance to the continuation of the funding for what's known as the PHC4, which is the Pennsylvania Healthcare Cost Containment Council, which oversees the costing and quality sort of study that monitors.
Now that's the group that the people were temporarily furloughed. Is that the good way to put it?
Yes, and so what we ended up with was essentially a furlough this week well, I mean, you could say it's worse than that. The agency's been closed. They were told to go home.
They have a little staff, a couple of people turning.
There's 5 people there guarding
turning
the
off
the lights go off on Thursday.
And I would point out that just in general, the administration coming out in early June and saying the governor doesn't want to take any risks this year. He's going to furlough state workers at 12:01 a.m. July 1st if there's no signed budget. And then the governor 11 days later saying, well, I'll probably do what I did last year, and if we're close, not furlough anybody. I still can't figure out exactly what that gambit was.
All right, I want to get to a couple of substantive issues. John, infrastructure, it's a big deal. Roads and bridges, how to get them on the blocks, bring them up, get them repaired, what did they finally decide to do with that?
We ended up with, there's an infrastructure package, a debt package of about $2.5 billion. Includes funding for water and sewer repairs, bridge repairs. What am I leaving out? That's the essence of it. And there's an additional bonding referendum question to borrow, and another $400 million for water and sewers. And we are now seeing the bill come due for years, in effect, of neglecting.
But there's a kind of consensus on, at least on that. That wasn't one of the more. As you did your reporting, there were kinds of consensus that needs to be done.
Republicans say this is good, quote, good borrowing because it's debt that will last the life of the investment.
We're going to run to a break. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I think the Minnesota bridge disaster last year sort of
woke everybody up.
All right, energy. They reached something of a deal on energy. What's in it and what that's all about? Final segment coming up. See you in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking about the 28.2 states billion, I better put that in, billion state spending plan. We're getting into some of the details, how it got to be law. By the time this show's airs across the state, it should be state law, barring some disaster, which I don't think is likely to occur with a trio of journalists that I often have on the program. All right, Amy Worden, one of the big debates was over Governor Rendell's energy plan. He got less than what he wanted. He got a little bit more in some areas. Explain this to our viewers.
Right. Well, Governor Rendell advanced his energy independence strategy in the budget, in his budget address of 2007, is 16 months ago. So, and in it, he saw it as sort of basically containing two components. One being conservation measures for both residences and business, and the other piece being sizable investments in alternative and renewable energy. So that's what he wanted. What he got in this budget deal, according to the what we were told on Monday morning, is that he got essentially the conservation piece, very controversial, opposed by utilities. But it was the smart meter portion of this that would have required basically overall a reduction in energy uses sort of across the board. That's been put off until the fall. He did get $650 million to be put toward alternative and renewable energy in the form of grants and loans.
Yeah.
Yes, considerably more than what the Senate Republicans offered, less than what the governor wanted by several hundred million.
Tony, I got to ask you this question. Some of the economic development money is in a fund called RCAP. I got that right, I think.
Yeah.
We don't need to get into the terminology, but it boils down to programs such as stadiums, film studios, economic development projects, concert halls, convention centers.
Airport.
Good old WHAMs. I mean, good old legislators get to do stuff for their constituents. We don't have to debate whether it's good or bad, but is that what that's about?
Well, yeah. I mean, I certainly there's an argument to be made that government assisting quality of life, capital bricks and mortar projects around the state. But certainly these things tend to get Christmas treed.
Now wait a minute, and the final question to you. And now they have a way in which the legislators are involved in the process. It all goes to a committee or a commission, right? Each caucus has a member. Anyone can veto, so they all work out a deal on how a lot of this money gets spent.
It's where's mine. All this stuff looks great on mailers, and everyone wants to make sure they get their piece.
Yeah, but this is sort of typical legislative. I mean,
in Washington they call it pork.
They call yeah. What? No, that is another name. What's the other name for it in Washington?
Earmarks.
So this is their version of earmarks. All right. Well, look, I want to thank you all for coming on. I understand. I'm going to repeat. The budget has not been passed yet as we tape this show. We took you inside the budget process and hope that you'll have a better understanding of it. We'll all probably get emails from everybody about this. All right, that's it. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.